Alright, what's going on, guys? My name is Nat Kajwara, and I did my presentation over syphilis. Alright, so for a little bit of introduction, syphilis is spread through sexual contact of any kind. The symptoms can be broken up into the different stages of the disease, and before the use of antibiotics, this was one of the most feared diseases in the world. So, as far as the symptoms go, this disease was known as the Great Pretender because there were so many vague symptoms that easily could have been mistaken as different diseases. So obviously some of them are headache, soreness, sore throat, achiness, mild fevers as well. But anyways, as far as the actual hallmark symptoms of syphilis, the first one is going to be the primary lesion or the chancre that develops wherever the infectious site is. And that will usually take an average of about 21 days to develop. So as far as these stages go, first is going to be the primary stage, and that's going to be about 2 to 6 weeks post-infection, with that average of 21 days, as I said before. And once again, that's going to be when the primary lesion develops, and that's going to be your infectious site. That's going to be the site where if it comes into any contact with any mucous membranes, especially through sexual contact, that's how it's spread. That's how it's going to get into your body and affect you. And wherever it comes in contact, that's where the primary lesion is going to develop on your body as well. Now, the secondary stage is going to develop 4 to 10 weeks post-infection, and that one's going to be characterized by a rash developing on the trunk and extremities of the body. So after the secondary stage, we have the latent stage, and the latent stage is going to be anywhere from 1 to 5 years of no symptoms whatsoever. So a lot of people would think that they were in the clear of any kind of illness because they wouldn't be receiving any kind of symptoms whatsoever. And on top of that, the first 2 stages of the disease aren't exactly hallmarks of syphilis, especially if you don't see the lesion developing. So a lot of people wouldn't try and get any kind of medication or treatment whatsoever. So the third stage is going to be the tertiary stage, and this is going to be broken up into 3 subcategories of it. The first of which is called gummatous syphilis, and this is going to be anywhere from 1 to 46 years after infection. And it's going to be, you're going to have non-cancerous soft growths that develop around your eyes, your nose, your neck, your lymph nodes. I'll have some pictures later of old statues that go over exactly what this looks like because it's hard to imagine. The next one is going to be late neurosyphilis. So late neurosyphilis is an infection of the central nervous system. This is what makes this disease so crazy, is that it also affects your mental capacity as well as your extremities and your physical appearance. So when I was doing my research, I actually found that Al Capone back in the early 30s, mid-30s, he was one of the first Americans to receive treatment of penicillin for syphilis, but by the time that he received the treatment, his mental capacity was that of a 12-year-old, and it led to complications that eventually led him to a stroke. So anyways, going past that, the last one is going to be cardiovascular syphilis, which actually is not as bad as it seems. It's basically just inflammation of the aorta, maybe a slight enlargement, but it doesn't cause any extra symptoms or anything. And then the last stage of syphilis is technically not a stage in and of itself, but it is the congenital syphilis. It is when a mother passes down the disease to her unborn child during pregnancy. Alright, so the causative agent for syphilis is the bacteria Treponema pallidum. It is a highly mobile gram-negative bacteria that has a very small genome, and because of this, it means it lacks metabolic pathways to survive on its own. So outside of its human reservoir, it can't survive very long at all. So the only way to really contract the disease is through direct contact. You're never going to get it from an object or from a swimming pool like some people have claimed in the past, but it's just because that the bacteria cannot survive on its own for very long at all. It's maybe hours, if anything. So as I said before, transmission happens through sexual contact or through a mother passing it down to her child during pregnancy. On top of that, you can get the disease by sharing needles. However, once again, because the bacteria cannot live without its reservoir for very long at all, there are not very many infections due to the sharing needles. Now, diagnosis can be done two different ways. Normally, a blood test is probably the most accurate and quickest way of knowing if you have the disease or not. But you can also have a dark field microscopy done of serous fluid, and I have a picture obviously below, and that's what they would find in the dark field microscope. So as far as preventative measures and treatments go, there's no preventative vaccine for this bacteria. So the only way you're going to know that you're not going to contract the disease is just to stay abstinent from any kind of sexual contact whatsoever. Even sexual protection is still not 100% guaranteed to keep you safe. So as far as treatment goes, there's two courses of action. The first of which is just an intramuscular benzathine benzylpenicillin dose. It's going to be injected directly into your muscles. If you have a penicillin allergy, there's also doxycycline and tetracycline doses that can be taken as well. Now these are going to be primarily for the primary and secondary stages. Anytime you have the later tertiary stages of the disease, it's going to be a bit late to reverse the damage, but you can slow the progression by doing a larger dose of the penicillin directly intravenously. So the historical context of syphilis is absolutely crazy. There's been evidence that suggests that Christopher Columbus brought syphilis back to Europe from the New World. However, there are alternate theories that it was an old world disease and it just mutated into a virulent form that it was for a couple hundred years. There's no real evidence either way that concretely proves it's one or the other. So the first outbreak, though, was in the French army while they were stationed in Naples in 1495. Now, because there was such a large stigma surrounding sex at the time throughout the entire world, it led to many names of the disease before syphilis was actually the name of it. So, to name a few, the French called it the Spanish disease, the English and the Italians called it the French disease, the Germans called it the French evil, the Russians called it the Polish disease, the Polish called it the Turkish disease, the Turkish called it the Christian disease, and the Tahitians called it the British disease. Everyone was blaming wherever they got it from, and this disease was just running through Europe with an incredible speed. So it actually got its name syphilis from an Italian poet in 1530 who wrote an epic Latin poem in which the main character's name was Syphilis. And it was about his life with the disease and him trying to get through and live it. The effects of syphilis throughout Europe went on for hundreds of years. It was only extremely virulent for probably less than 100 after it got back in 1595. But the effects could be horrifying, especially with the gummatous version. And here we have a picture of this guy on the right. All these statues, I'll have some more on the next slide. These are all actual depictions of people with the disease and what they would have looked like at certain points. So as I said, with the gummatous version of syphilis, in addition to the extra growths, the soft growths under the skin, you would also have just a general wasting away of the body. And there's certain parts of you, especially like your nose and your lips, that would kind of just rot away and almost fall off. So in this statue right here, you can kind of see what that would have looked like for someone, and it's almost like a monstrous look. It's just crazy to think that you contract this disease when you're in your early 20s, say, in France in 1530, and by the time you're in your 50s or 60s, you're just deformed, and it caused a lot of ostracizing throughout the countries that it had, and it just kept going. Some of the treatments that were given before antibiotics, the biggest treatment, the one that most people would receive, is mercury. Now they would either ingest it in the form of an elixir, or they would apply it topically in the form of like an ointment. And this is a whole other crazy aspect of this whole thing, is that so many people die from mercury poisoning instead of just the disease itself, that by the time the cure came around, kind of like the polio vaccine, everyone was like, it wasn't worth it to drink mercury, I guess you could say. So in the age of antibiotics, syphilis took an extreme turn in its threat level as soon as penicillin was prescribed as the main drug used to fight against it. Penicillin was discovered as a cure for syphilis in 1943 and has since been the main treatment for anyone with the case now. So as far as syphilis goes today, there's still a high number of cases due to the fact that STDs are just continuously on the rise. However, the mortality rate of syphilis has decreased significantly due to effective treatment. But on a side note, the infant mortality rate has actually increased from the congenital version of the disease. All right, y'all, thank you so much for listening.